see the light! We're saved!
The sea is unforgiving. As long as man has sailed the oceans, he has known that the sea is unmerciful. Whether it's the storm that rises on the open water, or the shoals and rocks near shore, the sea does what it can to tear asunder the great ocean-faring ships. Lighthouses were one of the few navigational aids for vessels maneuvering treacherous waters along the coastlines of the world. Many have been built where no man could be expected to survive, yet they mark important and dangerous waters for commerce along America's coast. Lighthouses have been built on small, hostile islands where waves often break over 100 feet, submersing the tower. Others have been constructed on beautiful and breathtaking locales that stand as silent monuments to their surrounding solitude. Their beacons, streaming out to sea for miles, were the source of comfort to many a sailor, marking their way from port to port. The familiar flash of a light or blare of a foghorn enabled them to pinpoint their position anywhere along the coast. It also meant that land was near and safe passage was possible. The current lighthouse and keeper's house on St. Simon's Island is a classic. It stands against the rocky shore at St. Simon's Sound and guards the Brunswick Harbor, where craggy reefs and treacherous shoals mark the ocean passage. The history of the lighthouse is long and diverse. Only a few hundred yards from where the current lighthouse stands, the original St. Simon's Light was a beacon for seafarers for over 50 years. During the Civil War, the light was extinguished so that federal troops could not use it to navigate the waters off St. Simon's Island. In 1862, federal troops invaded the island and forced the Confederates to flee. Before leaving the island, the rebel forces blew up the lighthouse to keep the Yankees from using it. In 1871, the U.S. government ordered the construction of a new lighthouse west of the old site. The 104-foot tower has 129 cast-iron steps that open onto a walkway below the lantern room. The beam of the St. Simon's Light rotates at 1 flash per minute and can be seen as far as 18 miles out to sea. St. Simon's Fresnel lens is a beautiful handmade work of art. There is a stationary interior lens with prism glass and a rotating outer lens that focuses the light with a bullseye. The lantern burned kerosene fuel, and in 1890, a fireproof brick oil house was built to house 450 5-gallon oil cans. The lantern had to be refueled several times throughout the night. The keepers carried the oil up to the light to refill the reservoir. The flame and smoke from the lantern made it necessary for the keeper to clean and polish the lens and brass fittings daily. The keeper would use handholds and walk around the glass to clean it. Legend has it that a ghost haunts the lighthouse. Many a keeper has heard footsteps on the metal stairs going up and down the tower. People believe they are the footsteps of the head keeper, who got into an argument with his assistant. The ensuing duel left the keeper dead. The legend claims that the keeper returns to make sure the lighthouse is properly cared for.
On this high peak in 1855, the Lighthouse Service established the first Point Bonita lighthouse. Unfortunately, it was above the layered fog prevalent in the area, and mariners complained. They complained that they couldn't see the light. And so in 1877, after many petitions, the Lighthouse Service relocated the lantern and the lens to this new site onto a lower structure. The light, of course, can't penetrate dense fog. So in 1857, the Lighthouse Service established a fog signal, the first one on the West Coast, and it was a cannon. They hired a retired Army sergeant, Sergeant Maloney, to fire this cannon. And his instructions were to fire it every hour on the half hour, as long as fog prevailed. After 2 or 3 days, the sergeant wrote the district inspector in San Francisco, and he said, "I've been up for 3 days and 3 nights. I haven't had a minute's rest. No one here to relieve me. All the rest I would need in the 24 is but 2 hours, if I could get it." Well, the service, of course, sent him an assistant. But after 2 years, they discontinued this fog signal as they realized they were spending $2,000 a year on black powder. It just wasn't worth it. On a seacoast, you need the powerful light. The Fresnel lens is made up of prisms. Originally, it was lead crystal prisms, and the lead crystal was found to chip. So the manufacturers of French lenses introduced sodium. This is called crown glass, and if you see a Fresnel lens with a slight green tinge to it, it's crown glass. Completed prisms were installed in brass frames. They were held in place with 3 little wooden wedges on each end, and then a 19th century caulk called Lafarge, white lead and linseed oil, was placed around the prisms to further hold them in place. The lantern room of a lighthouse is actually a tool. There are various elements of this tool, or this lantern room. One in top is a ball vent on top of the dome. The ball vent is hollow. It has a lightning rod on top of it, and has holes around the bottom edge. At the bottom part of the lantern room are air vents. The keeper would adjust these air vents to allow a certain amount of air into the lantern room. There are 3 reasons for air to be introduced into the lantern room. Air for combustion, air to keep condensation off the inside of the windows, and a vacuum to pull fumes from the old lamps up and out. Around the outside of the lantern room are handholds. The keeper would hook a ladder into a bar running below the dome and climb the ladder to either paint the frame or to clean the glass. The handholds were, of course, there for his security. Around the edge of the dome are water spouts to take the water off the dome. You see this a lot in lighthouses, this whimsy and little extra touches. Today, America's lighthouses are automated, personnel removed, but they still watch out over the waters, protecting the mariner, and they still stand protected by local groups to be symbols of our maritime heritage. George Bernard Shaw once wrote, "I can think of no other structure created by man as altruistic as a lighthouse." Pemaquid Point was constructed as a station in 1827. Rubble stone tower, a small house attached to it. Had a bell fog signal. It had a bell hung outside, automatic striking machinery inside, and a tall, thin tower behind it that held the weights. The weights descended, and they operated this Rube Goldberg type of clockworks, and every now and then when a cam dictated, a sledgehammer went through a hole in the wall and hit the bell. If you look in a light list, which is a Bible, if you will, that mariners have that tell them the characteristic and the location and what a light station looks like, it'll say rebuilt 1857. It wasn't really rebuilt. What happened in this case, and in many cases, was that the Lighthouse Board that took over in 1852 wanted to modernize the lantern rooms of the lighthouses around the country. They were going to bring in the Fresnel lens from France. So between 1852, when the Lighthouse Board came on the scene, and the Civil War in 1860, every single lighthouse in the United States that was operational had a new lantern and a Fresnel lens installed. Pemaquid Point was one of those. The existing tower, Rubble Stone Tower, is original. I think the keeper's house may have been rebuilt in the 1870s. They did a lot of rebuilding of keeper's quarters from crude, old, simple structures to new dwellings that were more habitable. It's a very picturesque light station. It's one of the prettiest locations on the coast of Maine, with long sheets of granite running down to the sea. Some rather tricky rogue waves come in, and people are occasionally plucked off the rocks if they stray down to this seemingly common sea. The most dramatic lighthouses built in this country, construction feats, superlative and difficult designs of lighthouses, are Minot's Ledge off of Cohasset, Massachusetts, which was built on a rock that is underwater during a portion of the tide stage. It's a monolithic type of lighthouse. It was very difficult. And it's also a very romantic lighthouse because of its characteristic. It has one flash, and then 4 flashes, and then 3 flashes. The people of the South Shore of Boston, off which Minot's Ledge is located, considered that the I love you light. 1 flash is I, 4 love, 3 you. In fact, many people getting married, even today, in that area of the country, have 1, 4, 3 inscribed inside their wedding ring. Another very important engineering feat in the lore of lighthouses in this country was the construction of the Tillamook Rock Lighthouse off of Oregon. The man that designed it, this new lighthouse, and actually built it, oversaw the building of it, was George Ballantine. He had to blow off the top of this rock. It looked like a clenched fist, but he needed a flat space on top. It was built in 1880, 1881. We're talking crude implements compared to what we have today. And then landing the supplies on this rock with the water continually swirling around it from the North Pacific was very difficult. Then they asked him to build St. George Reef. St. George Reef is located on a Northwest Seal Rocks off of Crescent City, California, right on the border between California and Oregon. This was a much more challenging event than Tillamook, which by itself was something for its day. On the Northwest Seal Rocks, he had to blast off a certain amount of rock so that he could have a foundation to build a caisson, an oval caisson. And this took quite a bit of doing. Just the wall of the caisson contains 1,330 blocks weighing between 2 and 5 tons. This was a very dangerous station. They had to seek shelter on this wave-swept rock so that when the blast and the eventual coming down of pieces of rock didn't kill them.
I think of lighthouses to the United States would be like castles are to Europeans. The Europeans love their castles. They were never born in them. They weren't raised in them. They don't live in them today, but they love their castles. This is the Strait of Juan de Fuca, which really is the Pacific Ocean as it goes into Seattle and Tacoma and Puget Sound. The ships must go through the Strait of Juan de Fuca to get to Seattle or Tacoma. So this is one of the major ports for the Pacific Rim. The Swim Dungeness Valley people have said, this is our lighthouse. We want to save it. We want to be a part of it. This is part of our heritage, right? Now, what about the bird's nest here in the vent? The last major remodeling looks like it was done in the 1950s. So if we do anything, we would like to take it back pre-1950s. We will try and look for grants that would help us accomplish this and do things as efficiently as we can with volunteers. This is a very critical lighthouse to shipping, even as we speak. The lighthouse was first lit in December 1857. They had 2 keepers. Their homes were at the base of the lighthouse. And in 1904, the separate head keeper's house was built, and that's where our volunteer keepers live for the week that they're here. Most of our volunteers love to do something. They feel that's their sense of identity or ownership. And after they've spent the week here, then they go back home and they will remember the one thing they did. If they just scraped and painted one door, they're going to remember that. The keeper that's here this week very quickly told me, I painted the front porch.
And I've had to paint the steps at the entrance to the resident house and clean the steps because people walking in off the sandy beach tracks sand in, and we got to keep those clean so it looks nice. And my wife, Chris, she takes care of the food and all the other necessary things in the residence. She loves clean houses and whatnot, so she went through this whole building and cleaned it all. We sign up and get on the list to come out here for a week. I'm never strained by the hours. I just work till I get tired and then I can quit. It's not like when you're working. To me, it's just pure enjoyment. Peaceful, very peaceful.
We have 2 memberships that come each week, so it's usually a husband and wife. They each pay $50 to spend 1 week here. And they have their own house, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, kitchen, living room, dining room. Then they keep the lighthouse open.
The water for the lighthouse comes from an artesian well that was drilled in 1930 to a depth of 660 feet. The water flows continuously, it's fed into this cistern, excess just allowed to run free, and we use it to feed the decorative ponds. This little wheeled vehicle was used on the tramway that was used to haul supplies from the boat landing up to the lighthouse buildings. The barn, built in 1884, originally used just to store supplies, later years used as a boathouse and later as a garage by the Coast Guard. Buildings were added to the lighthouse complex as they were needed over the years. This building, built of corrugated iron over a wood frame to be as fireproof as possible, was used to store the lard oil and the sperm oil that were later used to fuel the lamps. We're now in the lantern that was moved from Admiralty Head in 1927. The lamp that was installed in that time used a Fresnel lens of the 4th order that was almost 3 feet high. There's an auxiliary light mounted on the outside of the lantern that's used as a backup. This snaking land is the spit we traveled, the 4.5 miles of Dungeness Spit to get out here. Off to the left of it is Graveyard Spit, so named because of an Indian attack that occurred out here on the spit in 1868.
The spit was formed by the high, unstable, sandy bluffs. It's the fastest growing spit in the world. Some years it grows up to 20 feet in length, depending on the amount of sand that has fallen from the bluffs. In addition, we have the Dungeness River that flows down swiftly from the Olympic Mountains. And that river falls very rapidly into the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and so that also adds the sediment from the river to the spit. Driftwood has been washing up for years, and if you look at the differences in the age of the logs, some of them look almost prehistoric, They've been tossed and turned by the waves and the tides so many times that by the time they wash up on the spit or get lodged onto the spit and get lashed by the tides and the rain and the surf coming in on them, that they're just smooth. This is a special place. I love it.
Lighthouses in proximity can be confused at night, and at night there is a flash characteristic. One lighthouse might have a flash every 5 seconds, another one might have a flash every 10 seconds. During the daytime, the mariner needs a characteristic too, especially when you have like structures, like on the Outer Banks, Currituck, Body, Cape Hatteras, Cape Lookout, all tall towers, all about the same height, and if they were all red brick, the mariner wouldn't know which one he was seeing. So they have given them a signal, a day mark or a day signal. Some are horizontal striped, some are squares on them, and there's a barber pole type design on not only St. Augustine but Cape Hatteras.
The shallow waters and ever-shifting sands of the St. Augustine Inlet made sailors ever watchful when sailing to America's oldest city. The majestic striped lighthouse on Anastasia Island that marks the entrance to the inlet is probably one of the most impressive of Florida's lighthouses. Spanish settlers were believed to have erected the first tower at St. Augustine as a protective sentinel for the city. The United States government repaired the Coquina Tower, raised its height to 60 feet, and installed a lens. The eroding shoreline threatened the tower, and construction of a new lighthouse was begun in 1871. The new black and white striped lighthouse resembled a barber pole, clearly distinct from the solid towers in Amelia Island and Ponce de Leon Inlet to the north and south. Lard oil lamps gave way to wick-burning kerosene in the late 19th century. The keepers still had to carry up to 3 gallons of fuel to the lantern and light the wick at sunset. Kerosene was used into the 20th century, although man's ingenuity found ways to lighten the workload.
Well, my dad, he had a pulley from the top down the bottom. He hooked the kerosene can on that and pull it up, and then tie it off, and then walk up there and get it. That was his kerosene. Then they had to wind the clock, and there was a big weight hanging down at the bottom. They could always tell at night, he could tell how much he had left by the weight, you know, how far down it was, before he had to go wind it up. I think it was about every 2 hours, something like that, they had to wind it. But it worked just like grandfather's clock.
Cardell Daniels grew up around lighthouses, while his father traveled up and down the East Coast as keeper for the lighthouse service. He remembered fondly life in the keeper's house as a young child and the bountiful playground that was the St. Augustine Light.
I just did it once or twice. My dad, he'd come all the way down, but you just put a rag in each hand and run the railing, and it'd be kind of slick. But them railings were real slick then. But you just hold on to it and go from one landing to the other. And when you get right to the bottom, you just like a brake on a car, you know, squeeze it.
During World War II, the light was reduced from 20,000 to 5,000 candle power in order to make it more difficult for the German U-boats to spot ships that passed in front of the light. However, the Germans still were a threat to the shipping lanes along the East Coast.
We heard all this explosion and looked out there and see a big fire, and then German subs had blown up some of our freighters, and all that stuff would wash ashore. I didn't think they even had some bodies wash ashore.
After the attack on the freighter, the German U-boat was located and severely damaged. the injured U-boat escaped and limped home to Germany. But after that, all along the coast, the Americans kept a watchful eye on the waters from the towers of their lighthouses. Many lighthouses have grown into our nation's folklore, and St. Augustine is just one. It has been celebrated in a poem by a St. Augustine resident.
The Spanish lighthouse stands in haze. The keeper trims his light. No sail he sees through the long, long days. No sail through the still, still night. But ships that pass far out to sea, along the warm Gulf Stream, from Cuba and the tropic Caribbean, keep watch for his distant gleam.
The St. Augustine Light remains an active aid to navigation. Its beam can be seen 19 miles out to sea. The 122-year-old Fresnel lens still turns on its original metalworks, beaming a shining beacon to all ships nearby.
Living at a light station like St. Augustine in the 19th century, to me, would be in some ways a hardship. You've got some pretty unbearably hot, sticky, muggy summers with no air conditioning or probably fans, and the presence of things like mosquitoes and wool uniforms. First lighthouse constructed on Cape Cod, 1796 or 7, was the Cape Cod Lighthouse. It's the first one on the Cape, and it was after that rebuilt. Because of erosion, they had to rebuild the tower and the keeper's house. And recently, the International Chimney Company of Buffalo, New York, successfully relocated the tower and the older keeper's house and the connecting building between the tower and the keeper's house.
This is a lighthouse in danger of falling into the ocean in X number of years, the Lord knows when. And we are moving it back approximately 450 feet.
When we put the keeper's house back on its new location, the foundation walls above ground will be relaid with some of the original brick that's in the foundation now, but all the visible parts of it will be the same brick that's been there for 140 years.
In order to move this 450 feet, we have to start with all these H-beams, duplex beams. We have jacks fabricated inside. All these hoses you're seeing, you've got about 150-foot hydraulic hoses connected to all the jacks. It will be picked up unified. That is, every jack will pick up the exact same height.
Guys, let's go.
From where we are right now, it's going to take about a day to jack this up 7 feet. It'll probably take a good week to get this from point A to point B as far as rolling. And we'll take our beams out, our track beams out, and then we'll go to lowering it to its final elevation. If something happened to this landmark, you can't build it back. Everybody says, you know, you can build a historic house for a lot less money, but you don't have an old house. You wouldn't have an old lighthouse.
East Brother Island Light Station is a charming little station. It's 7/8 of an acre. It was constructed in 1874-75. One of 14 sprinkled around San Francisco Bay. There are 14 lighthouses on the approaches too, and then throughout the bay. It's a beautiful Victorian architecture. They built 5 of that style, very similar, It's a stick style, kind of a mixed architecture. It's redwood, two-story house with a three-story tower. Probably had a fourth order lens originally in it, Fresnel lens. Steam fog signal, started out as a whistle, and then in later years was a diaphone. In fact, that is still installed today.
The lighthouse was built in 1873. It was built by the United States Lighthouse Service. Two families lived out here. One family lived upstairs and one family lived downstairs. That way they had a little bit of privacy out here. Really didn't have much privacy other than that, being on a small island with just a rowboat out here to get to shore. In 1940, the United States Coast Guard took over all lighthouses across the country. When they did so, it became a military operation. Coast Guard vacated this lighthouse in 1969, and it lay vacant for 10 years. After that 10 years, the house was going to fall apart. So the Coast Guard decided to tear it down. It was saved by a non-profit organization, and in 1980 turned into a bed and breakfast.
Here at East Brother Light Station, we have 4 bedrooms. Each of our rooms is named for their views. This is the West Brother room, which is named for its view of West Brother Island. The Marin room upstairs is obviously named for its view of Marin. The San Francisco room is named for its view of San Francisco. And the Two Sisters room is named for its view of Two Sisters Islands, which are adjacent to ours across San Pablo Straits. The guests who stay out here spend some time together in the dining room for a 4-course dinner. And when they arrive, there's wine and cheese served in the parlor area upstairs.
Right behind me to my left, we have a cistern. And a cistern is a rain shed or a reservoir. We collect rainwater. It's the only way we get water out here. What happens is rain hits the cement pad that we're standing on. It runs off down towards the dome and then into these holes right here. The holes are plugged up right now. The only hole that's open is around here on this side, and that goes out into the bay. That hole that allows us to wash everything off, clean the cistern, collect our water. From there, we pump water into this tank above ground. The tank above ground is about half the capacity of the cistern right here, and it's our extra holding water. We use quite a bit of water out here, so we need extra supply for it. To the left of the cistern, we have the old dock house. The dock house now is the innkeeper's cottage. That's where we live. This is the fog signal building. Fog signal building was originally equipped with a steam engine that ran on coal. It ran a steam whistle, much like a train would have. The Coast Guard eliminated that in 1940 or thereabouts. They put in a diesel and an electric-powered air compressor to run these horns. They stopped using those in 1969, but they were restored so guests could hear them fire in 1979. This is the diesel-powered air compressor here. Diesel engine runs the air compression head right there, fills these 2 tanks. This is how we build up the pressure to blow the foghorns on the roof.
Augustin Fresnel was an engineer with the French Department of Canals and Roads. And when Napoleon came back into power, beginning part of the 19th century, he was out. There was a spoil system or something along those lines. While he was away from work, he started experimenting with light rays. And he developed what we now call a Fresnel lens. He died very early before he could actually see its use spread through along the coast of France. But the lens was developed by 1822 and then improved upon by not only his brother, but various companies that manufactured it. There were 3 companies in Paris and 1 in Birmingham, England, that made Fresnel lenses. The Fresnel lens was first developed. There were 6 sizes. The first order being the largest, 6 feet in diameter and about 18 feet overall. That's with the undercarriage. The smallest, 18 inches high and a foot in diameter. The size indicated the strength. First order could be seen in the old days with the old oil type lamps, probably 22, 23 miles. The 6th order could be seen 6 miles. And the reason is that on a seacoast, you need the powerful lights. It's a making light or a seacoast light. This is what the mariner sees coming in from overseas. The middle orders, the 3rd, 4th orders, were generally coastal lights. These are the lights that the mariner used that is in the coastal trade to fix his position. And then, of course, there are the anomalies marking a reef or an entrance to a harbor. The small orders, which did not need to be seen very far, were used as pier headlights or in the upper reaches of rivers like the Hudson River or niches of Chesapeake Bay. In addition to the orders, there were 3 types of Fresnel lens. The first type is fixed. It has bands of prisms around it, horizontal bands, that capture 85% of the light and send it out in a sheet 360 degrees around the lens. So the mariner gets a solid white light. The second type of lens is a rotating or flashing lens. This lens consists of bullseyes, round pieces of glass, with curved prisms over and under the bullseye. As the lens rotates, this beam of light passes the mariner's eye. To give you an example, if there were 4 panels, some lenses have 24 panels, but if there were 4 panels and the lens rotated 1 rotation per minute, the mariner would see a flash every 15 seconds. This lens also captures 85% of the light rays emanating from the light source in the middle of the lens, but it bends it into a pencil beam. If you're a bird looking down on the top of a lighthouse, you will see a beam coming out of every panel of the lens. The third type of Fresnel lens is a FVF, fixed varied with flash. This lens is a combination of the fixed and the rotating flashing. In this case, a portion of the lens around the circumference are horizontal prisms. As the lens turns, the mariner just sees a steady white light because they're horizontal prisms. These prisms are interrupted by round bullseyes with their curved prisms above and below, so that occasionally the mariner will see a flash. The importance of this lens is that he always has light. He always sees the light from the lighthouse, and then he gets a characteristic which tells him this is the XYZ lighthouse. And again, the difference being the lens are characteristics to provide different characteristics so the mariner can distinguish between one lighthouse and another. In the 1880s, the Chance brothers of England invented a 3rd1/2 order. Something was needed between a 3rd order, which was powerful and expensive, and a 4th order, which wasn't quite powerful enough. So they developed a 3rd 1/2. They also developed a mezzo radio, which is 7.5 feet in diameter, and a hyper radio, 8.5 feet in diameter, 22 feet high and weighing about 20,000 pounds. This mammoth lens, absolutely enormous lens, very powerful and used in places like Cape of Good Hope, Cape Race, Newfoundland, and on Makapu Point on Oahu, Hawaii.
original lighthouse came about as a result of several shipwrecks along the coast in the 1860s. And this being such a prominent point of land, this is actually the closest point of land to Hawaii on the entire continent. And in 1880, there was an average of 1 shipwreck a day along the Humboldt County, Del Norte, and Mendocino County coastlines. That's about 250 miles of coastline. So you can see the need for a lighthouse. Point Arena Lighthouse was originally built in 1869 and opened in 1870. The original structure was 115 feet tall, had a first order Fresnel lens, and that stood for 36 years until the 1906 earthquake. It was destroyed by that quake, fractured and condemned and torn down. It did not topple over. The replacement lighthouse was built in 1907 and opened in 1908 and has been here ever since. It also stands 115 feet tall, and it's one of the 2 tallest lighthouses on the West Coast.
This part of the lighthouse that you see here is a concrete buttress collar that was added to the base of the tower for earthquake safety after the tower was completed in 1908. It's probably one of the first concessions to earthquake safety, certainly in lighthouse architecture and maybe in a lot of other architecture here on the West Coast. Now, these stairs that we're on here are from the original lighthouse that was built out here in 1870. They were salvaged out of the old tower when it was damaged in the 1906 earthquake, and they were reused in the new tower that was completed in 1908. So these stairs actually date back to 1869. And this is the tube that contained the counterweight and cable, which operated the mechanism that used to turn the light before they got electricity. Was basically a large clockwork, and the counterweight was suspended down through this tube on a cable, and it was wound up to the top and then released, and the weight descending would turn the light. Yeah, this round flat area here looks like a large table, is a metal tank that contains 20 gallons of mercury. And in this particular mechanism, the mercury replaces the more common chariot wheels as a bearing for the light to turn on. And the mercury is extremely efficient and cuts down friction to virtually nothing. The lens in our lighthouse is the original. It was first installed out here in 1870. It's a first order Fresnel lens, which were the larger ones they used in lighthouses. And this particular one was manufactured in Paris in the late 1860s. The lens itself is made up of over 660 separate pieces of lead crystal glass, which are fitted into the metal frame to form the entire piece. Now, the original light source out here on the point was an oil lamp, and with the aid of the lens, it could be seen 18 miles out on a clear night. And in fact, they used oil lamps out here well up into the late 1920s before they finally got electricity. When they did, they replaced the oil lamps with a 1,000 watt electric bulb, and that did increase the range of the light, but only out to 20 miles, which was a net gain of only 2 miles over what they accomplished with the oil lamps. And it's really kind of an indicator of how efficient the old system really was.
The fog signal building was built in 1869. It was moved to its present location in 1896 when it was in danger of falling off the cliff. It is also the only structure that survived the 1906 earthquake. Everything else here was damaged or completely destroyed, along with most of the cities up and down the coast. The fog signal building is a wood structure completely made of old-growth redwood, and in the old days it housed the steam whistles. They used to have to burn 100 cords of wood a year just to drive the steam whistles. In the late 1900s, they installed electricity and put in air horns, and those were used until the late 70s when they were removed for efficiency purposes and replaced by a bell buoy. Most of the small fishing vessels here still rely on the light to guide them back to Point Arena or let them know where they are.
Yaquina Head is designed, the tower, built about 1870, tall, double-wall brick tower, that same type of lantern room on the top, small little combination watchroom oil house at the base. Interestingly enough, when they designed this, is a headquarters designed light station. When they designed this, it was for lard oil on one side and the keeper's watch room on the other side. But right after they designed this, the service switched from lard oil to kerosene, and they didn't want to store kerosene in the tower because if it blew up a very expensive tower. So starting in the 1870s, they started constructing small oil houses all over the United States, and it took them until about 1914 to have oil houses for every U.S. light station.
It's a spiritual symbol to me, because when that light first shines like that, it's like a message saying how many lives that light has saved. I met my husband, and he at that time was mate on a steamer. We were married, and he went on Channel Light, and that was in November 1920, because it was a cylinder light and the water was all around it. And we got out there, and I looked up 30 feet of that black iron. I had to climb a ladder to get up from there. And I stood there in the boat, and I said, "I can't do it, Elson." He says, "Oh, yes, you can." And that has been my motto all my life. When I get discouraged and think I can't, I hear him say, "Oh, yes, you can." Down below, underwater, was where the basement was. You could hear the water rushing by you up over your head when you was down there, and just hope the seams wouldn't burst open. So finally we reached Avery Rock. It's a very rough place, very rough. And we had no fresh food. The only time we had fresh food was Elson built a watertight container, and we put our meat in that and sink it in the ocean. And that would be comparable to our refrigerator. We go to Seguin, and of course his 3 families there, and a whole new environment altogether. We were allowed 6 tons of coal a year, and if we used that up, we had no fuel. So I went out to the coal supply, and there was none. I was faced with no fuel, so he broke up boxes and got my dinner. Then I went out trying to find driftwood, and I picked up this rock, and it bounced in my hand. And I filled my apron, and I ran up to the house, and I said, Orson, what on earth is this? He says, that's coal that's been washed for years. Where'd you find it? And every day, I'd go down at that certain period of tide, and I'd fill my apron, and that was our fuel for that time. The tramway is, of course, that was really built to haul the supplies up. Now that is an elevation of 144 feet. And of course, when it isn't in operation, we used to walk up those. And in fact, when I was 85 years old, I walked up again. After Seguin, we went to St. Croix, because that was our paradise. It was a lovely house, and it had a nice piazza when we came. That was the loveliest spot to sit and see the boats going up and down the river. Those people on those lights were dedicated people. They weren't there for the money. They were there to do a service. And they did their service. They did it well. And that's why that I try to express the old lighthouse so people won't forget that we do have wonderful history.